Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Lydia. I am the president of the UTM Anthropology Society at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, who's hosting tonight's fantastic event. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances, we obviously cannot meet in person, but we are very happy to have everyone here virtually. Please note that we will be recording this event, and if you are interested in receiving a copy afterwards, please email us at anthropology@utmsu.ca. We'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. During the panel discussion, we will hear about career possibilities in anthropology and the career paths of our panelists and what it's like to work professionally outside of the university with an academic background in anthropology. This will be followed with a Q&A session with the audience after the moderated panel discussion. If you have any questions during the session that you would like to be asked in the Q&A, please private message Q&A in the Zoom chat or Shahani. Our Vice President, Bryn, and Secretary-Treasurer, Vinna, will be moderating the panelist discussion, and our Events Coordinator, Shahani, will be moderating the Q&A towards the end. I'd now like to start off by briefly introducing our panelists. So first we have Crystal Forrest. Crystal received her master's and PhD in biological anthropology at the University of Toronto. Crystal has recently been named the Registrar of Burial Sites for the province of Ontario, working with landowners, archaeologists, and descendant communities when archaeological human remains are found outside of cemeteries. Crystal also conducts consultations with Indigenous communities regarding the burial sites of their ancestors. Next, we have John Dunlap. John received his Bachelor of Arts in Archaeology at the University of Toronto in 2002 and a Master's in Applied Archaeology. He is a licensed archaeologist and has been active in Ontario for over 20 years. John is the Manager of Heritage Planning and Indigenous Relations for the City of Mississauga, where he works with Indigenous residents and communities on creating indigeneity in the city. Over the span of his career, John has worked in the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industries for the province of Ontario, and as a project manager and field director in consulting archaeology. Next, we have Dr. Madeline Mant. Dr. Mant is a research associate in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, and a lecturer in anthropology of Health Stream. She launched the Let's Talk About Health interview series this fall semester to provide context and discussions concerning health-related careers. Interviewing experts such as midwives, pharmacists, and paleoepidemiologists, Dr. Mant explores how individuals pursuing these varied careers consider the concepts of health, illness, sickness, and how a background in anthropology can provide the foundation for work in health. Let me take a breath. Next, we have Dr. Daniela Kramer. Dr. Kramer has a PhD in social anthropology from the London School of Economics in London, UK. Her academic work focuses on Vanuatu, a South Pacific island nation. She sees herself as both an academic and an applied anthropologist. When she is not in Vanuatu or teaching anthropology, Daniela works as a lead ethnographer for a Vancouver-based social service design shop called In With Forward. In With Forward blends anthropological research methods with design thinking to reimagine and redesign what social services in Canada could look like for populations such as street-involved adults, adults with cognitive disabilities, isolated seniors, newcomers, and refugees. Next, we have Adam Allentuck. Adam began at the University of Winnipeg in the anthropology program. He completed a master's at the University of Manitoba and obtained a PhD at the University of Toronto, specializing in archaeology of the Near East. Following his PhD, he completed his postdoc at University College London. Prior to his current position at Diamond, he worked as a research consultant for 2 years at National Public Relations. And lastly, we have Amanda St. Clare. Amanda began studying anthropology at Trent University and completed her master's at the University of Toronto, focusing on South American archaeology. After the completion of her master's, she entered the professional industry in a variety of roles in strategic consulting and stakeholder engagement. She has worked in various organizations such as the Hamilton Conservatory of the Arts, Metrolinx, and heritage museums in the city. She is currently the stakeholder engagement lead for the City of Toronto, supporting the development of policy in infrastructure and development using a lens of equity and inclusion. Thank you. Those are our panelists for today, and I will now turn it over to Bryn and Finna, who will begin with the moderated discussion panel.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Bryn. Vinna and I will be moderating today's panel. I'm going to take the first half with some kind of like basic questions. Before we begin, I would just like to note that due to time constraints for each of our panelists, we'd like to allot about 3 minutes per response. We'll begin with first some general questions, then ask a few specific ones. The first one, what is your current position? What do you do in your occupation? And how have you been able to apply your studies in anthropology to your jobs and careers? We'll have Adam go first, and then we can follow as.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I guess we're going alphabetically. That makes sense. Right. So yeah, I left the academy a few years ago. Things got real for me. I had a child and great responsibilities. So I had this idea of actually pursuing an academic life in the long term. I got frustrated by years and years of disappointing applications. I've always though had an interest in sort of consumer behavior. Consumer behavior you can think of it in terms of, hunter-gatherer foraging strategies. You could also think of it as modern day shopping. For me, I was always just interested in what motivates people to make choices. It turns out that in private industry, people are actually, stakeholders are interested in the same issues. They're called customers, not foragers. They have money, not spears, but anyway, it turns out that in marketing, there's clients who are interested in understanding the customer in great detail. So I started actually applying some of my research skills, which were based in kind of, digging up the past, but also a general knowledge of anthropology and ethnography and I applied these methods when interviewing real live people. So, I somehow, and actually I know exactly how, through a contact of mine who was actually an office mate at U of T, he kind of introduced me to this wide world of consumer research and marketing and advertising. And he kind of like really sold me on it. At the time I wasn't interested. I was still like gung-ho on my academic pursuits. But those conversations stuck with me. And years later, when I was looking for something a little more stable, a little more dependable, I had more conversations with him. And yeah, one thing led to another, which is sort of like a way of cutting to the chase. Yeah, I got into the ad business. So now I do primary qualitative research. I also do some quant research when necessary, because archaeology kind of like provides you with a broad base of research methods. So I've been yeah. So I think one of the questions you had was like, what is my job and where do I work? Let me get to that, because I probably have like 30 seconds left. I'm a strategist at an ad agency. The agency is called Diamond Marketing Group. They have an office that is barren and empty, but it's on Adelaide Street, downtown. I used to go there. So yeah, I'm a strategist. I've been there about 3 years. I work on essentially solving problems for clients, and those problems always have to do with human decisions, and clients are always interested in what will motivate people to make some kind of purchasing decision, or what will motivate them to switch from one brand to another. In other cases, most recently I had a project where I had to very creatively, but also with a foundation in research, try to develop a new brand for a company. And it's in financial services, kind of boring, insurance, but nonetheless, you know, there's actually just for all you students, just know that there's actually a lot of demand for anthropological insights in private enterprise. And I know, it sounds like I sold out, and I did pretty hard. But anyway, it's actually a lot of fun, and I do enjoy the work very much every single day. And that's it.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm sure a lot of people are trying to buy products either online or hopefully not in person. Yeah, I guess we'll have Amanda to go next, if that's okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. As in my intro, I am currently working with the City of Toronto in an infrastructure and development division, doing actually within that municipal licensing and standards, which when I first started, I was like, what the heck is this? And like, what am I doing? But essentially, it's a division that is a really heavy policy division and creating policies related to some health and safety around housing, some business stuff such as like holistic licensing, body rub parlors, vehicle for hire. So those type of different licensing. I'm trying to think of some of the other big short-term rentals. So these different policies that we work on, some are social, some are very much more business. That's where I work. I support, we have like 700 staff. I'm the only person who does my job. And I'm essentially like the only social science person in my team. And essentially what I look at is when our team's creating these policies for change, I'm trying to predict risk and impact to our stakeholders. And that's understanding people. We live in one of the most diverse cities. Understanding people, understanding, you know, that there's cultural nuances that we have to be cognizant of, and we need to be socially sensitive to, and really taking, and that would be where my anthropology lens comes from. My background's in archaeology, but we all have this foundation of compassion and understanding, and which I lend to these. And so it's really highlighting for my policy team, which is small, you know, helping them work through some of these issues, ensuring that we're being inclusive. And inclusive might mean, okay, we work with the Indigenous Affairs Office, let's talk to them, how do we best engage, and really making sure that that we're creating those opportunities and decreasing barriers for participation. And so really that's a lot of what I bring. I'm the only anthropologist in our team, and I think some of the things I say, they're just like, you know, it's like new to them. So I'm very happy and proud of that. I'm trying to think of what some of the other stuff I do. I mean, some of it's pretty basic where I'm like building relationships, you know, having conversations with people, and some of it's a little bit more technical where I'm going through research and I'm going through policies. A lot of these skills I developed actually come from, I was assistant director on some of the archaeology projects I was on. So there was like a lot of project management, a lot of relationship building, like working within governance to move things forward. So it's a lot of transferring those skill sets and putting them, you know, here. I worked abroad, so here in Toronto. I think I answered all your questions.
Yeah, that was really great. I like how you like integrated all your different skills that you've learned along the way and then brought them to each individual career and job that you've had. I guess if we're going in alphabetical, we'll move on to Crystal. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I wasn't sure if I should unmute or if you were going to do it for me. Hello, everyone, and I'm very glad to be here, glad to accept this invitation to come and speak with you. So in the preamble and my introduction, I've recently been named the Registrar of Burial Sites for the province of Ontario. And by recently, I mean, I started that job on Monday. So I I am in a learning mode at the moment, trying to wrangle my government issued technology. So I won't have a lot to tell you about that position. I've been in government about 5 years now after finishing my doctorate and then working in industry for a little while. You know, I came in as a technical expert in archaeology. I worked for the Archaeology programs unit at the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. I coordinated and managed workload as well. And, you know, the bulk of my responsibilities there was providing technical advice regarding sites, archaeological sites where human remains had been found. And before entering government, I had spent quite some time working in heritage consulting, cultural resource management, leading the excavations for these sites. So that's sort of how I came into government. I did that for a while, so using, you know, subject matter expertise, all my archaeological skills. And as the previous speaker, I think her name is Amanda, mentioned, there's within government, there's a lot of relationship building. There's learning how to communicate with your stakeholders. Those are the people who have a vested interest in the projects you do. So I think, you know, for me, I came out of 2 4-field anthropology departments, one at the University of Western Ontario, where I did my undergrad, and then at U of T, which, as you know, is 4-field. Although I worry that that's eroding slightly. But I was very glad for the skills that I learned in all the sociocultural courses that I took, because the position that I moved into out of that, you know, initial subject matter expert role was as a policy and program analyst for the Center of Forensic Sciences. And I was there for about 2 years, and the major projects that I was leading were the most sensitive ones there. So leading a project team to improve awareness about mental health issues in the workplace for those who work in forensics, anthropology, or otherwise. It's a huge issue. Again, highly stigmatized, very sensitive. And so I was charged with creating a wellness strategy and then creating a wellness team. And I'll tell you, knowing how to talk to people about sensitive issues, having thought a lot about that academically speaking, helped me enormously. And the other project that I led was a workforce assessment. So the leadership team sets out a strategic vision for the organization, and they want to know how they get from point A, where they are right now in time, to point B, which is the achievement of that strategic vision for the organization. So I led a team of managers and staff in the completion of what's called a workforce assessment. So looking at who we have now, where we want to go, and then creating a plan for how to make that happen. And that involved extensive consultation with stakeholders. So I think that's all I'll say for now. I hope that I hope that got to the, you know, the heart of the question.
Yeah, no, congratulations on your new position. I hope
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so we'll move on to Daniela. Whenever you're ready.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing this. This is great. So yeah, as you mentioned in the introduction, I work as the lead ethnographer or lead anthropologist, actually the only anthropologist, at a small organization. We're called In With Forward. And basically, we believe that social services in Canada are failing lots of population groups, particularly seniors, people living on the streets, people with cognitive disabilities, newcomers, refugees. The kinds of supports available to them, often, you know, in nonprofits or other kinds of social service agencies, don't really fulfill needs other than basic needs. So we think a lot about higher needs like beauty and purpose and flourishing. And so what at the base, what we try to do is we are trying to reinvent what social services might look like for populations in need. And as the ethnographer, what we do is we blend social science methodologies with design thinking. And so probably many of you have heard of UX design and human-centered design. So our team is made up of designers like that, as well as industrial designers, people who build things and make things and prototype, and social scientists, ethnographers like myself. And I train a number of social scientists in particular research methods. And then we go out into the field, and we do very similar ethnographic field work as, you know, as a social cultural anthropologist, as I did during my PhD. So our clients are often government, government or nonprofit organizations, groups who care about their population and are feeling a little bit stuck, feeling like the social workers and even in government policy writers, they don't really understand what's happening on the ground. A lot of it is academic or very high level, and they don't have the kind of intelligence that ethnographers can provide to them. So last year, a few months ago, we worked for the Department of Criminal Justice, and we spent about 3 weeks following around a group or different Indigenous adults who are going through the criminal justice system. And we made these huge journey maps to see, like, at what point did they enter the criminal justice system and what was their journey along the way. And we use, what makes us a little bit different from doing ethnography or classical ethnography, is we use a lot of tools inspired by designers, like card decks and prompts and journey maps, to make the ethnography quite specific and quite fast. And I was a little bit skeptical of this process, coming from, you know, the London School of Economics and the, like, heartland of Malinowski and participant observation, but it has actually blown my mind as to how much people like engaging with tactile tools like pictures and words that, you know, you give them options to choose from. They might never even have thought about possibilities. So I can give you briefly a couple examples. So last year, we also spent a lot of time in a drop-in center at Queen and Bathurst, a drop-in center for street-involved adults. And I spent a lot of time recording people's conversations and just observing who are people talking to, you know, the people who come in and out of the drop-in center, talking to the social workers there, what kinds of conversations are they having, how long do these conversations last? I mapped all this out. And I realized that these conversations were really short, and they were always the same thing. How are you feeling? Oh, I'm really hungover, or, you know, I'm looking for a place to stay for the night. These conversations didn't help people think about the future or move in any kind of different direction. So with that little kind of a small data point, we then spent some time with some narrative therapists to think about how do we get people to think about the future. We developed a little prototype that we call Curious Conversations. And now the social workers at the drop-in center are carrying around a little bag with a little booklet in it, and they'll take someone to a table and bring out these card decks and have a kind of much more meaningful, longer conversation with them about what they might want to be doing differently in their life. And when we sort of reflected on the outcomes of this, we were starting to notice that the conversations in this whole drop-in center were really quite different, that it had the trickle-down effect, and people weren't just talking about you know, where they were going to sleep or the next meal, but they were starting to talk about, you know, things of meaning and things that inspired them and gave them kind of hope. That's one example. Another very short example, our biggest platform, it's actually scaling across British Columbia. We spent some time in a facility for adults with cognitive disabilities. And we spent a few weeks there, and we realized that adults there are really bored. They go bowling once a week, they go swimming once a week, and that's all they have to do. So based on that ethnographic data point, we have now built out a platform. It's called Kudos. You can find it online, and it's an experience platform where a caregiver or a person with cognitive disabilities can choose from, I think we've got about 200 different experiences, like learning to bake pizza, or reading the news together, or talking about sex, these sorts of things. And it links a person with cognitive disabilities with someone in the community, a volunteer, to have a kind of interaction. So instead of only swimming and bowling once a week, they now have 200 experiences to choose from. So to wrap it up, that's kind of what we do. It's it's very much ethnography. We spend a lot of time on the streets at night, walking around, talking to people, lots of notebooks, very similar to classical anthropology, but then we use these design tools to rapidly prototype something and then test it out in the public, with the idea of creating new kinds of social services that will really help people kind of think about their lives differently.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm in Dr. Kramer's class, sociocultural, and I really, when she brought this this organization up, I'm like, this is like fantastic what they're doing. So I really want you to join today. But we will move on to Dr. Mant for our next speaker.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm so thrilled to be on this panel. I've been really enjoying hearing about all these other careers and the things I'll start pursuing when maybe like Adam, I go, actually, maybe this isn't for me anymore, because I feel like a little bit of a dark horse because I'm currently working fully inside the academy for whatever that's worth. I am currently a research associate at University of Toronto, Mississauga in the Department of Anthropology. I can see a couple of my students are here, so thank you so much for coming. I took this invitation because I'm really passionate about anthropology being a building block for many different careers, because anthropology, as we all know, preaching to the choir here, helps you think holistically. And so there's so much flexibility, I think, within, a BA or a BSc in Anthro that can put you in really good stead for pursuing a lot of different careers. So for myself in particular, I did a PhD in bioarchaeology and an MSc in paleopathology over in the UK. So I was all about bones for quite a long time. And now I work mostly within a broader bioanth, sort of med-anth medical history focus. And so I think even within my own research, my own teaching, there's been so much flexibility, which is why I accepted the invitation today. So in terms of what a research associate does, my job is I teach 3 different courses over the course of the year, currently teaching an introduction to the anthropology of health. I teach more specialized courses in laboratory methods and infectious disease and food and nutrition, etc., depending upon the year. But most of my time is also spent on research. So I have an externally funded research program in which half the time I look at health and wellness within 19th century prisoner populations in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the other half of my time is actually interviewing people currently about their experiences with COVID-19. So within sort of bringing, very obviously I'm applying anthropology since that's what I'm doing full time right now, but thinking about this question, I wanted to bring forward other jobs that I've had, either have currently or have had really recently, in which anthropology has helped me and they have helped my anthropology. Things like I worked for many years as a historical interpreter, so dressing up in costume and living the life of somebody from the 19th century, etc., working in educational programming, and cultural relativism and trying to put oneself in somebody else's shoes made a huge difference in some of the that type of performance. I have a background in theater and performance, which definitely goes hand in hand with a lot of my teaching. But when I'm not teaching and or researching, I do also things like copy editing and proofreading. I've been hired to be the researcher for various historical book projects, etc. So all the skills that I've gathered within sort of the teaching environment have definitely been applicable in sort of other categories. But I think what we'll probably talk about a little bit later is the let's talk about health and sort of anthropological careers aspect of what I do. Part of the service, and when you're working within academia, there's an expectation they'll be teaching, research, and service. And part of the service I've done for UTM, both back in 2016 when I just finished my PhD and in the last couple of years since I came back after a postdoc, was talking to students about career possibilities and not only being sensitive to the fact that not everybody wants to be an anthropologist, although everybody should, obviously, but that also that there's so many ways in which you can use the skills that you have. And so the anthropology of health stream is where I'm currently teaching, and it's been a really wonderful way for me to use my interest in health in the past to start to ask questions about health in the present as well, and helping a lot of students, I hope, think about both careers and pathways to things like graduate school, depending where they want to go, but also paths outside of the academy, because I've met tons of students who have no interest in graduate school, but are so interested in using some of the skills and being an anthropologist in other parts of their lives. And the secret, of course, is that everybody can be an anthropologist. It's just a matter of how you're kind of channeling those different skills in the different areas in which you might end up. So I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk a lot more about that later. So I'll stop for now, but just want to say thanks again for having me here. And it's a real pleasure to go talk about anthropology on any evening.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting to see your perspective that you can use anthropology everywhere. Yeah, and last but not least, we have John.
Good evening, everyone. I guess it's not quite evening, but it's pitch dark outside when I look out my window, and it feels like it's about 10:30 at night. So thank you very much for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. As was said in the introduction, I'm the manager of Heritage Planning and Indigenous Relations for the city of Mississauga. So it's wonderful to be able to connect with everybody at UTM. I've been having a lot of conversations with UTM. They're been a lot of work happening in terms of, you know, indigeneity on the campus, as well as just preserving the heritage that exists on the campus. I know not everybody's a fan of brutalist architecture, but I am, and the Davis building is just a wonderful example of that. And you know, make sure you vote heartily and let the administration know that the city should be preserving that building on behalf of the university. But aside from that, that's part of what I do. So my role in the city is sort of twofold because of the two positions. The Indigenous relations part is a very new part. It just came about in June of this year, and it really is the result of sort of the maturity of the city. Amanda spoke earlier. You know, that Toronto has an Indigenous Affairs office that's well established and has been providing services to Toronto City team, I think, for some time, well over 5 years. Mississauga is now at that point. Right now, the team is just me because it is COVID and it is difficult to be recruiting people for jobs. But we're looking forward to expanding the team in the new year. Wink, wink. Anybody graduating and wants a job? You know, it's about. It really is about the return of indigeneity, and not that indigeneity ever left the city, but speaking about it very openly. You know, and that's something that you know, Mississauga has been very focused on sort of the Canadian dream. It's a suburb, you know, it's experienced exponential development growth over the last 40 years, and its history and its heritage hasn't always been front of mind. But as a city, it's matured to a point now where people are suddenly looking at these buildings and going, this is a landmark. You know, this, you know, you've got, you know, Arundel Village right by the campus, and the residents have become very in touch with the heritage and the meaningfulness of those, what is still very much a small village in the heart of a larger municipality. And there's also the awareness, you know, the credit mission, which is located just south of the campus there. It was very much a precursor to the modern day reserve system, which currently is spread across the entire, well, country. And there's always been an acknowledgement, but it's never been a formal acknowledgement. And so the beginning of the work has been a bit of a catch up in making sure that the city acknowledges it, but also making, you know, normalizing it. And I mean normalizing it for everybody, be you the bus driver, be you the engineer who's designing the sewer system, or the person that's figuring out what kind of public art can go into a park. You know, it's about understanding the settler role in this, you know, understanding the treaties, educating city staff, and really making regular engagement with specifically the Mississaugas of the credit, but with all the Indigenous communities that were mentioned in the land acknowledgement in the beginning, that there's a return to their perspectives that come into city building. You know, so when we tackle planning and development projects, when you see you know, all the condo towers that are now dominating the downtown city core and so forth, you know, are the conversations happening? And beyond just the conversations, what perspectives are being offered and how are we integrating that into how we build the city? And then the other part is of course just good old-fashioned heritage planning, and the fact that, you know, Mississauga actually has a very vibrant history. It sort of isn't celebrated as much as it could be, and that's my other role, is championing that. And you know, be it protecting small farmhouses that are now completely surrounded by subdivisions, or protecting, you know, the village cores. The story of Mississauga is really one where, you know, it was obviously all Indigenous land that was eventually treated and ceded away to colonizers and settlers. And then these villages grew up. You had Port Credit, you have Meadowvale, you have Arundel, you have Streetsville, and then the city grew out of that sort of post-war World War II era. So it's a very young city, but there's a lot of history there. And as Mississauga matures, as Mississauga becomes, I think, the most diverse city in the country right now, I think we can tout that. I'd have to check the city website and see which factoids we're promoting these days. But you know, making sure that there's this understanding of Mississauga. And so relying on anthropology is very much, you know, it goes back to that relationship building. I build a relationship with, be it the individual homeowner who owns a heritage property and wants to put an addition on to obviously all the Indigenous communities that we work with, to city council, and persuading the politicians that make the decisions that this is the right way to go for the following reasons. And so it's a very dynamic, sometimes difficult and frustrating, but also incredibly rewarding role that I get to participate in the city.
Oh, thank you, John. That was really interesting. I know since I've like started university, I've seen a lot of Mississauga geared towards bringing back ingenuity back into the city and back into the university. So that's really interesting. All right, so we're gonna move on to our next question. I'll post it in the chat, so then it's a little bit of a long one. I'll post it in the chat so that everyone can have it. So as you have all completed your education beyond your undergraduate, either your master's or your PhD, what would you suggest for an undergraduate student to know before heading into their master's or PhD? Are there experiences you would suggest to help them make this decision, such as getting involved into the university or the community, or going into a field school opportunity? So we'll start with Adam again.
Great. I'm the guy who doesn't have any time to prepare an answer. But that's okay. I think I have something on my mind. So I think I'll speak from experience. I think I'm going to tell you what I have to say is based on my own shortcomings. So when I transitioned from my undergraduate to master's to PhD, I was very idealistic, focusing really just on the work. I really wanted to, you know, I wanted to have some breakthrough research. I wanted to discover something. This was my focus. The softer skills I neglected. So things like networking with the right people. I didn't really realize that that was an important thing until it was way too late. So, you know, because like there's a lot of some nepotism that goes on at universities and in the hiring process. So I feel like, you know, in hindsight, I should have made greater efforts to schmooze with the right people. I didn't do that. And also, I mean, it's not that my research was breakthrough, but either. So, but I really I think that's the one key thing that I wish I had done better. Something else I think was that I didn't do, which I wish I had done, was been more involved in the service, and sort of offering my service to the university, you know, joining committees. You guys are all great because you're part of this student group, you're doing your part, but I mean, and I was part of mine. In fact, I think as I recall, it's been years, but I think I was the vice president of my student group during my master's program. But when I started my PhD, I totally was laser focused on the work. I neglected everything else, including, you know, joining committees. I would have beer with people, of course. Who could say no to beer? But I didn't really, you know, I wouldn't say I was a well-rounded PhD student. I was very focused again. So again, like, you know, my advice to students, to you guys, would be to, of course, get great grades, breakthrough research, of course, study hard, yes, but also it takes more. It takes like some people skills. You have to network, and you have to sort of give back to your community. And I think those things will actually shine through later on. They'll pay off. It's, you know, it's hard to manage those things at the time, but it will pay off down the road.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know during my university, they're pushing networking. Like there's a networking event like every week. They're like, just come talk to them. So yeah, it's really interesting. All right, Amanda, what would you give to an undergraduate student thinking about going into your master's?
I'm going to be quite frank, and I welcome anyone to disagree with me. So I think open and honesty. First of all, not everyone's path is the same. So really remember, like, if you're feeling pressure or stress, like we all have such different paths, and all the experience, everything you're doing is building towards something. You often don't know what the end is. So, you know, Adam made a point of like, get good grades, do the work. It's like anything you choose to do it well, do that well. Make the connection, do it well. And, you know, yes, we need to have some goals, but your path's most likely going to change. I actually was accepted at Ann Arbor, Michigan to do my PhD in archaeology there. And I was like, you know what? Not going to do it. Just couldn't do it. And so, and I'd worked so hard at U of T with Ed. That's a good school. Like, and they held it for me for a year. And I was like, you know what? Still not going to do it. And I'm just saying this because, like, and this is, I actually did my master's degree as an older student. I actually have an undergrad in business management prior to anthropology. And all that to be said is everything you're doing, you're on a path to somewhere, and just do good work. And so don't really compare yourself to either. Like, listen, but don't worry about comparing yourself. Networking is key. Start a LinkedIn account today. It was the biggest mistake I made. Not biggest, but it set me back. I'm like, oh my God, what's this LinkedIn thing? Now, anytime I meet somebody, I'm probably gonna add some of you folks, because it's great to see what other people are doing, who they're talking to, and it's a great way to like capture your connections if you don't go into academia especially. So I definitely suggest networking is 60% of what you're gonna be doing. And it's, you can't network just by being friendly with somebody. It's about doing good work and having conversations. So those are two things I definitely recommend. As far as if you're thinking about doing your master's or your PhD, do your PhD if it's going to get you where you want to go. You don't have to do it. If, you know, and that's the advice that was given to me with one of my mentors at Trent, is some things you need it for and some things you don't. And then some things, like, you'll always have a benefit, but don't put pressure on yourself if it's actually not the path that you want to take. My master's degree, I mean, it was great for me. It helped me develop a lot of critical thinking skills. I would not trade it for anything, and I was able to network through it and connect through it. So I definitely would talk to folks, you know, talk to as many people as possible, and don't put too much pressure on yourself if you decide. We tend to be competitive a little bit, and we need to be careful for that. I talked about networking. Sorry, I wrote a couple of notes down. I just wanted to make sure I hit everything. Oh, and one of the questions was about how do you get involved? Anything you hear that sounds interesting, if you have the time, volunteer. You don't know where it's going to lead you. When I first left the academia, my first year, I took tons of these little contracts. Like, I was trying to get some of the ball rolling. A lot of my skill set and what I sold on my resume were those volunteer type roles. And that's what gave me an edge. And I think I'm over my time, so apologies.
No, what you're saying is very interesting. I think each student needs to take their own path, and whether that is like further education or whether it's just after you're done your undergrad, just go out to the workforce and see what you can find. Yeah. All right, Crystal, what advice would you have?
Well, this is going to be, Auntie Crystal's advice about your career or time. So the first thing I would say is that while you're pursuing your studies, do also work. Do different things outside of doing your PhD, because or your master's, because that's how you'll meet people and make connections. That's worked incredibly well for me. You know, I finished up my PhD and I was like, yeah, I'm going to get myself an academic job. And there were none. And I'd have to move to some tiny town in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, I was in a relationship with someone who was making actual money here in Toronto, not, the crappy money they offer you initially in academia. And so I decided to stay here. And the way I made that work was to use the network that I had built outside of academia. So I had worked in cultural resource management for many years. I had volunteered at museums. I had basically you know, my advice is say yes to as much as you possibly can, because you never know who you're going to meet through that. And it can be those people that you meet that are your most powerful connections. And I think engaging with them as people, not as, you know, means to an end, where you're like, oh, this person could be useful for me. You keep the connection for that reason, you know, you're never gonna, it won't be meaningful in the same way. So taking an interest in things that people are doing, and being curious and open-minded, and trying things you never thought you would do. You know, that's when you're in school, you have the ability to do that, especially, you know, when you're young. You're not tied down in the same way. The other thing I'd say, and your professors are going to hate me for this, but nobody cares about your marks in school when you're done. Literally, if you get the degree, it's a check mark and on to the next thing. So don't sweat it too much if you're not you know, the greatest academic superstar, if you're not thinking about continuing in academia. I think I spent way too much time, you know, worrying about that rather than thinking about what I actually wanted in life and what I wanted my life to look like. And, you know, academia wasn't giving me that. So, so from my perspective, it's your experience that counts for more. And I'll tell you, the students who we hire in government for our summer employment opportunities are the students who volunteer. They're the ones who have experiences outside of just simply going to school. You know, just going to school doesn't get you very far. So if you're looking at applied careers, you want to make sure that your experience is as varied as possible. And now that I've, you know, ragged on the PhD, the master's for a bit, I will say that having the PhD has opened doors for me. That was my way into government, having that specialized, you know, bioarchaeological knowledge. That got my foot in the door. Certainly it helped me. And I know in government, they tend not to, or the stereotype is that they don't like PhDs, but I think it really depends on where you are. I'll say for those of you who are interested in jobs in government, what I would recommend, you know, after you finish your master's or PhD is to go and get a degree or diploma in something like public policy, because policy jobs come up all the time and they're always looking for people. People move around a lot. So again, it's that openness to explore and try something different. And you need to start cultivating that during your master's and PhD, because it will help you to succeed.
Thank you. Thank you for your insights. They're very valuable. We have next Daniela.
All right, I think I'll talk specifically then about students who do pursue the master's and PhD, how to be a little bit savvy in that regard. I think if you're thinking along the lines of master's PhD, first, I think you really need to ask yourself the question, like, do you want to work in academia, right? Because like some of the other panelists have mentioned, there are very few jobs and very few, you know, tenure track positions. That whole notion of the tenure track position it doesn't really exist very much anymore. So a lot of us are, you know, piecing together careers with contract positions. You know, I teach at Laurier and I teach at UTM, as well as working at Inwood Forward. So I would, if you are considering continuing in the PhD direction, talk to some people who are either doing a PhD or who've just graduated, who are in the job market, and kind of have a sense of what you're getting yourself into. I don't think I really knew. I kind of thought like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna get a job. The second point there is around, someone mentioned moving around a lot. Tenure track jobs are often in probably places you don't necessarily want to live in, especially if you already have roots in Toronto. So be aware of these kinds of sacrifices that you would have to make if you do want to go down that line. I have a lot of friends who are working in very small communities or very small towns outside Europe, not even in anthropology departments. They're working in geography departments or like Middle Eastern studies departments. So I know a lot of people who pursued that path, but aren't actually doing what they thought that they would be doing. But if you decide that you want to give it a go and you are, I talk a lot of people out of doing a PhD actually, although I do think it was one of the best decisions of my life. You know, as someone mentioned, the skills you get, and I wouldn't have landed the job I did with Ford without being able to bring in all my experience in qualitative research. And you know, Google, Facebook, they are hiring PhDs all the time, people who have very good methodology skills. But that aside, if you do decide that you want to do a PhD, I would suggest be really, really savvy about the topic that you choose. So I went in kind of like Adam, thinking like, oh, I'm gonna be really interested just in this topic and think about the knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? So I picked Vanuatu, which is, you know, you've probably never heard of it. It's a country in the Southwest Pacific. People in Australia know about Vanuatu. No one in Canada knows about Vanuatu. So there, you know, there's a professor, Sandra Bamford, does Papua New Guinea. We've got Maggie Cummings, who does Vanuatu. At York, we've got Sandra Widmer, who does Vanuatu. So we pretty much saturated the Vanuatu specialty in Toronto. Okay, so then there's me, right? So I would say be very savvy about picking a topic that you're going to be able to take with you into a career. Diversify, like pick a topic that is either really fundable, so like the environment, China, read the news, go to the Werner Grund website, see what other people are getting funding for, and pick something that you know is going to be applicable. Really, no one in Canada cares about urban placemaking in Vanuatu. So that hasn't gotten me very far. So what I've been trying to do is to position myself more in terms of applied anthropology, teaching applied anthropology, and focus on methodology, because that's something where I think university departments don't really have a strong foothold now. So I'm trying to, you know, change track academically. Then the last thing I would say as well, other than be very savvy about the topic, is you know, my supervisor was also very interested in the knowledge for knowledge's sake and didn't encourage me to publish, didn't encourage me to go to conferences. So this was the UK. I think it's very different in North America. It didn't encourage me really to teach. So when I graduated, and then I, you know, immediately tried to find jobs here when I came back to Canada, I didn't have much experience at all. And I was competing with a lot of recent grads, even undergraduates who had that experience. So if you are going down the PhD route, I would, you know, it's very important to write your thesis, but we also get very stuck on writing the most perfect thesis. There's no such thing as a perfect thesis. It's the finished thesis, right? No one's gonna look at the grade. No one's ever gonna read your thesis other than your mom and your supervisors. So I would also then really write as much as you can, publish as much as you can, even if it's in the conversation or the medium or blog posts. Get your ideas out there, get used to publishing, and get used to selling yourself. People have been talking about networking, but I'm not very good at selling myself. And some of my colleagues are very good at that. And I think that is also a little bit of the key to success, that you have to be a little bit, you know, have confidence and not worry about whether people think that you're, you know, without shame, right? So I have a friend who just self-published a book, and her LinkedIn profile is a picture of this book in between other books. And she writes how happy she is to see her book amongst the books of other influential writers. And in my head, I'm like, but you put that book there yourself on your own bookshelf with your selected chosen books, you know, but she's promoting herself. And I think that's really important. And that's why she is doing really well. So that would be my advice if you do go down that PhD route, which, like someone said before, you just don't have to, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I think selling ourselves is like we're being selfish, but I guess it takes us places that are maybe better. All right, Madeline, what advice would you have?
Yeah, no, I'm so blessed on this panel to get to follow these other fabulous people, because there's so many things they're saying. I'm just nodding aggressively along as they're saying. So I've got some notes kind of scrawled here, and some of this will be echoing what's already been said. But I really, really resonate with this idea of grabbing as many opportunities as possible. So taking a look at the question, and also some of what the panelists have already said, like absolutely, grades aren't everything. Asterisk, but there's something. And so it really does depend upon kind of where you want to go. If your path is towards graduate school, or you're looking at various other school programs, take a look at what the minimum requirements are. And if you're meeting those and you're feeling okay, then I think you're in a really, really good position to be pushing yourself in other areas. So a lot of it is about, I hate even hearing this word, but here it comes, balance. How are you balancing your time, right? Think about where you're spending your time most effectively. Somebody once said to me, how you spend your days is how you spend your life. And I thought, obviously, and then I kind of went home and thought about that. And I was like, right, if you're spending time on committees that you don't care about and volunteering for things that maybe you're just doing because you feel that you have to, that's not a great way to sort of be spending your undergrad. There's certain things you have to do and certain things you're choosing to do. So just have a, sit with yourself a little bit, particularly at the end of the semester, and have a think about where you want to be putting your time towards. I noticed in the question here, a question about field school opportunities. I was really lucky to be able to do a field school after my second year of undergrad, which helped me realize I love bioarchaeology, but I literally can't take the heat. I'm a fainter, and it doesn't do too well with field school. So I did faint. That was the end of the story. There's not a secret there. But the idea of maybe being a field bioarchaeologist wasn't for me, but it really helped me understand how much I loved things like archival resources and legacy collections and working in other sort of literal environmental areas. So if you have the ability to do a field school, then that's a fantastic way to move forward. However, field schools can be really expensive. Field schools can be not great for people with mobility issues, and there's a million different ways in which they're not always accessible. So there's questions too about how do you gain some of those skills, maybe just back on campus. Volunteering with professors, talking to your professors, people who do work that you're interested in, go talk to them. A lot of professors, particularly tenured professors, tend to have a project or two lying around that they would love to have somebody come and work on. So a lot of this is making your own opportunities through being a little bit bold. There's networking has been talked about a lot, so I won't harp on the same point, but Adam and Amanda and Crystal all made this good point of networking can get you a lot of things. And Daniela talked a little bit there about selling yourself. And I agree with everything everybody has said so far, but just to reassure people that have come here, from 5 to 7 p.m. on a Wednesday night, you obviously care about potential careers and are thinking about this. And just rest assured, everybody gets it. Everybody understands that networking is part of this, even if we're not directly saying it sometimes. So if you sidle on up in a Zoom call and go, hey, they get it. It's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed. If you want to write that cold email to somebody you've never met before, dear Dr. So-and-so, hi, it's okay. It's okay. I receive those sometimes. I've sent a million of those. Goodness gracious, I've sent so many of those sort of awkward sounding emails. Just read it out loud to yourself. Make sure there's no spelling mistakes before you send it. But everybody understands that the making of connections is really, really important. So don't be embarrassed to network, because we're all networking all of the time. Even just showing up here today to have a chance to talk with us, that's networking. I feel like I'm networking with all the cool panelists too. It's happening all the time. Don't be embarrassed about something that we all definitely have to do. But in terms of moving networking into, and again, not like what can they do for me, but in using your connections in a way that makes sense, think about reference letter writers. And this is just a tip for those of you who want to move on to graduate school or to various other programs that might require it. If you need, 1 to 3 references, sometimes an academic one, sometimes an arm's length, sometimes a character reference, etc., for work study programs or for field schools or for graduate school, asking a professor you had one class with 3 years ago is just not going to be that great a reference, even if you got an A+ in the class, because reference letters reflect a lot about relationships. So the best ones I've been able to write are for students who've come up to me, a year in advance and said, I'm really interested in this program, XYZ, and I would love it if maybe you could be a reference for me. And I'm like, we'll see. But no, really, I say, okay, great. Let's talk about that. Let's continue to have a conversation. Email me next term, send me an updated resume, so that when I write a letter, I can say, this student is so passionate about this project or about this area. They've talked to me about it before. I've known them for over a year talking about this, etc. So think a little bit when you're building some of those relationships to never be ashamed to sell yourself, to build those relationships, because you are your best cheerleader. In terms of just kind of wrapping this up and thinking about if you do move forward with ideas of graduate school, I loved my MSc program. I loved my PhD program. I would do it again. I wouldn't do it again in this lifetime, but I would do it again if I was doing it again. So, but is it for everybody? No. Definitely not. It wasn't for some people in my program. I watched a lot of people go through a lot of stress and try and make big decisions about feeling like they were failing or something if they were deciding to leave academia. And there was no failure that comes part of it. It's your life. So the biggest advice I can give, and I try to be as honest as possible. I really appreciate what Amanda said about here it comes, is that just think about it. Research is lonely. Research is expensive. Research takes way longer than you think. And that's on the good days. but it can be incredibly rewarding. You can be moving towards projects that can have applied reasons for people. There can be a lot that's really, really wonderful about a research career, but just be aware going into it that you're not going to get a lot of gold stars, and you'll be doing a lot of this on your own drive and your own resolve and your own resilience. So yes, life is short, but life can be super long too if you're doing something you're not enjoying. So just take some time and be honest with yourself. And also, if you're worried about applying this year but think it could still be in the future, that's okay. That's what the future is for. Building those relationships and having a think and going into graduate studies and or into the workforce at the time that's right for you is the best. So I think really the best gift you can give yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good of just being like us as students being honest with ourselves. Do we want to spend the next like 2-4 years in academia, or do we want to go out to the workforce and see what's out there? All right, and last but not least, again, John, whenever you're ready.
Oh, thank you. So I actually took a 10-year break between my BA and my MA, and not necessarily by personal choice, but more that when I was doing my BA, I was working 3 jobs while I did a full-time studies, and my marks suffered as part of that. And then when I was going through the application process for grad school, I was relying on the marks that just did not distinguish me from anybody else. And it wasn't until 10 years on, and I sat down and I as a more mature professional, let's say at the time, decided I'm going to go back and go get an MA, because I felt that I needed the MA in order to progress in my career. When it came to writing that letter that you have to write as all of the applications, for the first time, I actually put, like some context around the marks. And that goes a lot back to positioning yourself and selling yourself and providing that context. So like, maybe you don't have the top marks in your class. That's okay. What is there a reason for that? And it's like, tell your story, because ultimately you've got a great story to tell, and that's how you're going to distinguish yourself. Don't rely solely on marks. They really don't matter. And I know everybody else said this and like, yeah, they don't matter, but it's about how do you distinguish yourself? How do you make yourself stand out from the crowd? When I was working as a project manager in the CRM field, I hired field crews every single year. And when we were pouring through all the resumes of all, either the recent grads or the students that were going through, it wasn't the marks, it wasn't the academic background. I mean, we'd look for an archaeology background, obviously, but it was, are they involved in committees? Do they volunteer? Do they look like a real go-getter? Because the other part of it is like, and I would encourage, go out after you finish your bachelor's degree and do some work. Whenever I hired new field crew at in an archaeology consultation firm, I took those crew out. I always had the new crew, and I ran them hard for the first 3 weeks. And let me tell you, at the end of April, walking farm fields in Ontario from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. is just grueling. You will sink to your knees in mud, and it can be absolutely terrible. But if you can get through that, it's the opportunity to figure out, is this what I want to be doing? Maybe fieldwork isn't your thing. That's awesome. As Madeline said, there's lots of work to happen in the labs. There's technical report writing if you're looking for that type of thing. There's so many opportunities, but don't fall into what the expectations are that, to be an archaeologist, you have to have had field work. One of the things I always noticed when I was putting together a crew was everybody would compare field schools. Oh, where did you go to field school? I did the Ireland one. I went to U of T, so of course everybody did Jordan. Everybody went to Jordan and did the Jordan field school. I actually didn't do a field school. I went knocking on the doors at the ROM when I was in my second year of my undergrad, and I started volunteering at the ROM until I got an access badge that took me to the behind the scenes part of the museum. And then I took my resume and started knocking on all the doors of all the departments looking for volunteer positions that were a little more academic than working in the Discovery Gallery with school groups. And I ended up in the Near Eastern and Ancient Civilizations, I think that's what it was called at the time, department, because the head of that department had finished a survey of mosques in Yemen. He had over 800 mosques that he'd drawn done beautiful hand architectural drawings of, and he needed someone to digitize them. And nobody had those skills at the time. And this is going back 20 years, right? So Corel Draw was what I was using. But basically it was just scanning in these architectural drawings and then tracing over them with Corel Draw so that there was a digital copy of these architectural things. After doing that for 6 months, he comes into the office and he goes, hey, do you want to go to Yemen with me? I got to go do a dig for a month. Do you want to go to Yemen? Yeah, absolutely, I do. This is why I got into this, was to do archaeology. So always find those opportunities, you know, have some tenacity in it. I don't want to say don't take no for an answer, because that makes you sound really pushy, but don't be, if somebody says no, knock on the next door, because you'll find that yes. And oftentimes that's where you want it to end up anyways. And it's not that first door you necessarily knocked on.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good story about connections. Is like, if you go in probably with no expectations, then like something's gonna pop up eventually, whether 6 months, a year later, or whatnot. I just had a request from Stephen Dorland if he wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Bryn. So everything that's been said by the panelists here, like, this is all great information. So take this all down. Like, these are personal experiences. So first thing, and a number of you have covered, but it's okay to take a break, gather your thoughts, get a job, get some financial assistance. It will help in the grad school, the master's. It will help immensely having a little bit more money. Number two, there are skills available through programs on campus, professional skills, professional development. So it's good to volunteer, but it's also good to develop transferable skills. And there's a number of these programs at U of T that you can take that would greatly help. Everything you develop helps you in the future. So you get opportunities to develop your teaching skills, your opportunities for networking, for all those things. It will help later on. Number three, see rejection and failure as a learning moment, okay? Don't worry if you don't get into that one grad school program, move on to the next one. Don't worry if you don't get that grant. Don't worry if you don't get that publication. See what comments they gave you. See what comments you got. Move to the next one. Don't get tied up to that one thing. From experience right now I'm in the job market, you got to get over that quickly, or you're going to burn yourself out before you even start. And I think, like, I see, like, and the number of this panelists here, grades are important to get into programs, but you do not over worry about them. You're going to just stress yourself out, and you don't want to burn yourself up before you even start the process, because a PhD can be really rewarding, but it's also very tiring. A master's program is more manageable. The PhD is, make sure you're doing the right life decision at that moment. And number four, there's a growing number of teaching stream positions, not necessarily tenure, but they're multi-year contracts. And so teaching is an opportunity you can go into, as well as educational development, so curriculum development. So if you don't really see yourself as a researcher, but you like the teaching aspect, you can also go that route as well. But all this stuff that's been said today, this is just like, take these notes, because this is going to help you immensely, and you have all these perspectives that are coming together. So
if I could just jump in real quick, sorry, I just want to say, I'd like to go back and heavily encourage everyone to take a break between your bachelor's degree and your master's, because let me tell you, having, like, and I hate the term real world experience, I really do, because everything is in the real world, except this is digital, obviously. But you know, when I was the type of bachelor's degree student that, like, I think for my final physics and archaeology paper, I started writing it at 2 a.m. and it was due 9 a.m. the next morning. I actually remember I got an A on that paper, which I don't know how I pulled that off, but I did. But that's not the point. Grades don't matter, remember. What's important is when you go out and you're working a job and you've got those deadlines and so forth that you have to understand, you go back to do some grad work, and it's just easier. I found it to be so much easier and so much more enjoyable, because it's like, you know, your professor says, okay, you have this assignment that's due on Friday. All right, it's due on Friday. I've developed my time management skills to the point that that's not a problem. I know I can fit it in. I know it's going to take me 10 hours throughout the week. you know, and I can do it over 2-hour breaks every night, because I also did my master's degree while working full time and having a kid. I would not recommend that part of it, but I would recommend waiting a bit to do your master's degree. Go out, work a job for a bit, see if you can find a vocation and a career, and then come back to it, because you're going to find it, I think you're going to find it a lot easier to tackle that grad work. Sorry for jumping in.
Oh, no, thanks. No, that insight was great. I think a lot of students are like, oh no, I have to, like, right after, let's get this education over with. And like sometimes we just end up burning out. Like I'm sure a lot of students right now are.
Can I jump in? Because I did the opposite. I blitzed it. I did 3 degrees in 10 years and like worked. And there were some times, you know, periods where I was literally working 7 days a week, and it was really tough. But it also taught me and showed me what I could do. So that's sort of the other side of it. And you know, there were times I recall in the 3rd year of my PhD where I had just about had it. I felt really stressed and like I wasn't sure if it was something that I wanted anymore. And you know, I had this conversation with my mom, and she said, you know, I know you may not think it's important to finish this right now. And I know that this year has been really difficult, but if you continue and you persevere, you'll have that in hand when you go forward, regardless of what you do. So, you know, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing what I did, which is like just go full on. But I'm also kind of the type A personality that does that anyway. You know, John can attest to that. We've known each other and worked with each other for, I don't know, over a decade now. And, you know, some of us can't help ourselves and throw ourselves into everything and work constantly. But you got to think about what's right for you. And, you know, I'd encourage you to have conversations with your loved ones, family members, your support network about, you know, how it is that you're doing and what you want in life. So having those conversations, and you may not know, and that's okay, but just being open to that and sharing how you're feeling at a particular time, you know, you can get some really great advice from unexpected places. And in my case, it was from my mom. So not super unexpected, but well, we can debate about that. Anyway, there you go.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. It's great to have all these different perspectives, and thank you everyone for giving your advice. I'm just going to pass this over to Vinna, who's going to have some more specific questions for each of you.
Hi everyone, my name is Vinna. Once again, thank you all for being here. Now I'm just going to ask some specific questions we have for each of our panelists. So first of all, Dr. Daniela, our question is that considering that you've traveled a lot throughout your academic life, do you find it difficult to balance your academic life teaching and your ethical works in Vanuatu?
Sorry, the last part cut off. Was it about balancing?
Yeah, so balancing your academic life and then your ethical works in Vanuatu with that you worked. I'll type this up as well.
Yes. So yeah, it's difficult. I'm currently on maternity leave. So I've got a 1-year-old, and it's been really interesting to me how much more academic work I have accomplished while on maternity leave than working full time for In With Forward. So In With Forward, we're, like I said, a very small organization, and we work very long hours, very long weeks, and we you know, go and live in Edmonton for 2 weeks. And so obviously in those situations when you're, you know, doing like deep ethnographic research, you're not getting other stuff done. So I kind of balance Vanuatu and I balance In With Forward work. And yes, to answer your question, it is really difficult. And I'm starting to realize that I would like to carve out a little bit more time for my own research and writing and space to think that is outside of this very busy, very fast-paced kind of more industry work. And also the difficulty with having a full-time job that's outside of academia is you don't have the time to go back to the field. right? So I haven't been back to Vanuatu in about 4 years, I think. And I was hoping to go on maternity leave. I thought that was a perfect opportunity to take my baby there. But with the pandemic, that hasn't happened. So I don't know what advice I would have for students other than it's really hard to do it all at once, but sort of have kind of faith that if you look at the big picture and you make like a 5-year plan, you're going to try to be able to fit things in that. And maybe, I write a lot of lists and I try to prioritize some things over others.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. Now we have a question for Dr. Madeline. So when we consider health careers, we usually think of like doctors, nurses, psychologists, or physiotherapists, and they all have an education in their respective fields such as medicine, and possibly not in reaching out to anthropological perspectives. So do you think that health career education should incorporate more anthropology? And why do you think they should add another perspective, and how might this be beneficial?
Okay, short answer is like, yeah. Absolutely, this is my whole thing. Yeah, no, thank you for that question. That's super, super interesting. So this is so interesting. And I think this actually helps us reflect a little bit back on some of the earlier questions that we're having to do, or the earlier answers we're talking about some flexibility, right? And like, how can you use anthropology in different ways? And so within, I think it was Daniela now, sorry, I'm forgetting exactly who said it because everyone's been so brilliant, but the idea of flexibility, I think this is coming from what she was saying, and publishing in certain areas and sort of, how do you sell yourself in a certain way? So I come from a background of bioarchaeology. So everybody I have worked with has been dead for quite a long time and nobody talked back, which really worked well for me. So working with dead people for a long time, there's a certain type of ethics, very much a privilege to work with human remains, etc. So I had developed a lot of thoughts around bodies and embodiment and the ways in which that, I work with human remains and what we can learn from them. Now, in terms of the job market, they don't need a lot of bioarchaeologists right now. There's a lot of fabulous people who aren't looking to retire anytime soon. And so I started looking at the job market when I was a PhD and thinking, okay, what are other areas that might need an anthropological voice? And the area of anthropology of health is an area that's been sort of rising in the last few years, along with things like health humanities and medical humanities. So interest in bringing some of the social sciences, the humanities aspect to play on issues of health. And so not that you're going to get anthropology of health in every single department, but that some of that more holistic look at some of these issues was people are being hired for it, or people might be working in it. So I started trying to publish in medical history journals and in public health journals and in pushing my research in those directions. So I've been over the last 5 years or so kind of going through some of this development myself in terms of how can I use thinking anthropologically or thinking holistically in studies of health in past human remains and now also in living people. Now, that helps to extend into ideas of, I truly believe that every medical school needs to have a medical anthropology course. And there's quite a few that are doing a lot more incorporation of bringing together the idea of the so-called soft skills, but of course, those really critical interpersonal skills that are really, really important for those patient and practitioner relationships. So the Let's Talk About Health series, for instance, was born out of this idea of not only are we digital this year, so we want to make sure to get as much access to people as possible, but that by doing and thinking about anthropology through health, you can actually see how there's lots of different careers that you could take on if you wanted to, or at least see how health plays into those. So with that interview series, I spoke with an individual who works as a standardized patient. So the person who plays sick, and like is an actor who plays sick during medical or pharmacy exams, people that work as nurses, as midwives, as pharmacists, folks that work as health geographers, paleoepidemiologists, so again, looking at the past quite a lot, disability studies in English literature, a dietitian, a physiotherapist, et cetera. And I asked them a lot of the same questions. I said, what do you do? Why do you do it? How did you get there? But how do you use terms like health and wellness and illness and sickness and disease? And everybody had a slightly different definition of how they were thinking about it, which to me is the anthropology of it all, right? So I think in terms of integration, there's always a chance to talk about holistic medicine, to talk about the whole body, to talk about, let's break down this mind-body dualism thing. Like Descartes, it's, come on, like let's move forward a little bit and think about how we can bring a lot of this together again. So there's definitely room within a lot of training programs for that, but also in terms of it, because it's a careers night, a BA or a BSc in anthropology, or taking it as a specialist or as a minor, is building some of those skills. So plenty of anthropology students, and I know this because I watch them do it from my undergrad on, go to medical school, plenty go to law school, plenty go to graduate school, or change into many other different careers because the skills are really, really transferable. So I think I'm just looking at the question here again. Should they incorporate more anthropology? Absolutely. But why do I think they should? Why would it be beneficial? Well, think about the last time you went to the doctor. Was it the best experience? Some people have fantastic experiences, but we need to work on the cultural relativism and cultural curiosity to make sure that we're talking about things in the right way. So I think building in something like Anthropology 220 at UTM I really love teaching it because it's a chance to say, let's start problematizing and thinking about biomedicine as not just the normal thing we have, but as one of many systems in the world that have worked for a long time to help people think about their own health. So that's kind of in a very large nutshell. I know I've been very long-winded, kind of how I feel about all this, but this is why Anthro of Health is really important, but also why we need to be thinking about those type of that holistic medicine and obviously holistic thinking about bodies in all areas of work. So do check out Let's Talk About Health. It's on YouTube if you want to follow it and take a look. They're open for everybody if you're interested in looking at those. And do feel free, I'll drop my email in afterwards. I hope maybe everybody will too. If you want to talk more about what, how anthropology might fit into your world with a healthcare career, I'd be very happy to either chat with you myself or to pass along a lot of content information from the lovely folks that have spoken to me on that interview series.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I've always been interested in health and then anthropology. So just seeing this new course, especially at UTM as well, just got me so excited. So thank you so much for your insight. So we only have 30 minutes. So our next question would be to Crystal. Was the shift between studying biological anthropology to working in an archaeological field difficult for you?
The short answer is no. The long answer is that I was on my first archaeological site when I was 14 years old. I did a field school when I was in high school. So I actually started in archaeology and discovered that my favorite thing about archaeology was actually looking at the skeletal remains of people from archaeological sites and telling their stories through their remains. So it wasn't difficult for me because I did it backwards. So I started in archaeology, then I got into the biological anthropology and bioarchaeology specifically. I did that a while, but I sort of hopped between the two. And a bit of advice about that, while we like to think that we're generally open in academia to cross disciplinary study. That was not my experience at all. As a student, I think I had a lot of trouble because I was interested both in archaeology and in skeletal biology specifically. And marrying those two easily in a program, it wasn't something that was being done at U of T necessarily. There are other programs, and I think perhaps now they do it better, but it created problems. And then on the back end of things, when I finished my PhD and I was applying to jobs, I would apply for archaeology jobs and never ever get an interview because my PhD was in biological anthropology. So I had that label, even though the lens through which I studied, human remains was archaeological. It was, bringing in culture history and ethnography of, Iroquois peoples in Ontario, and trying to articulate that and have and gain acceptance was very difficult for me. And that kind of goes both ways. I had this degree in biological anthropology, but I wasn't necessarily interested in questions of evolution or primatology. It was very much rooted in archaeology specifically. So I would caution those of you who, like me, have sort of a dual interest in both, that it can make things problematic in terms of communicating your research. And I would say that's a problem not with you and your research, but with the academy and the way that things are structured. So, I do hope that there are more opportunities for students to explore across the subdisciplines or across different disciplines, although I'm not super optimistic about it, if I'm honest.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Our next question is to John. So what happens when a construction occurs on a land and they come across an indigenous artifacts? Are these artifacts then stored in heritage sites or returned to their indigenous groups? And how does this process actually work?
That's a really great question. And the answer is hopefully the process works that that's not going to happen, because years ago, what basically created the whole CRM industry in Ontario was making it a requirement prior to construction and development to do an archaeological assessment in advance of development, so that it answers the question before the bulldozers ever get there. Now, the reality of the situation is that's true probably about 90 to 95% of the time. And then there's always the situations where stuff is found during construction. And then it just makes things really difficult and complex and causes delays. I mean, in Ontario specifically, it's a robust process and a robust set of legislation that Dr. Crystal Forrest is now a big part of, especially when it comes to the human remains, of making sure that that is removed. But that's kind of that's also its biggest problem, is that it's all about the mitigation and the removal. And I think the biggest challenge in Ontario right now is the fact that if you're operating as a licensed archaeologist, you're part of, so to do archaeology in the province, you have to carry a license, which is issued by the ministry, the heritage, whatever it's called, tourism, culture, and sport is what I know it best as. And you're, as the part of the licensing requirements is, you have to hold every artifact that you excavate in trust for the Queen and the people of Ontario. And it is this outdated and frankly nonsensical requirement that you have to hold on to these artifacts. And when you've have a lengthy career and you've accumulated vast collections, it can be extremely problematic. There are some very famous issues that arose around 20 years ago surrounding these collections, and it's rightly known as a collections crisis. Now, there are places like Sustainable Archaeology that act as repositories, and for a not nominal fee, for a fairly substantial fee, they will take those artifacts off the hand of licensed archaeologists. But the question, do they go back to the Indigenous communities? That's a two-sided issue, and one is, and it gets really to the crux of this Indigenous settler relationship that we find ourselves in here in Ontario. The one being that there's legislation that says all the artifacts that are excavated in all the archaeological digs that happen across the province every year, and there's hundreds that happen every year, all have to be stored under very specific conditions. So if an Indigenous community doesn't have a repository of their own, which they can't necessarily get any funding for from any government body to build, legally, you can't give them their artifacts back. Here specifically, and in Mississauga, one of the biggest issues is, who are you going to give those artifacts back to? There's three main groups of people that were identified in the Land Acknowledgement, and they all claim ownership of those artifacts. And it's not our role as settlers to say, oh, this one belongs to the Mississaugas, and this artifact belongs to the Haudenosaunee. Anthropologically and archaeologically, there are massive treaties that I think Dr. Dorlin is very familiar with. If I remember some talks I heard him give back when he was still an undergrad student, by the way. I feel really old seeing him as a professor here tonight. Anyways, about identifying, ceramics and artifacts and so forth as belonging to specific, cultural groups and so forth. But you then end up in this very modern world of treaty rights and Aboriginal rights. And when I was working for the province, I was confronted by the Mississaugas of the Credit on a project that was happening that was in Iroquoian village, and asked bluntly, is the province going to uphold our treaty rights? And that was a really difficult situation to be in. And I panicked for a half second and I said, yes, absolutely. We recognize your treaty rights. We are required to, but this is culturally Haudenosaunee site. It's actually an Adirondack site based on the location and the time provenience and so forth, but it's identified as Haudenosaunee. It is an Iroquoian site. So they are also going to be participating in this dig, not to exclude any other group, but at the end of the day, then you have this wonderful cooperation happening in the field, but then what happens afterwards and what happens to these artifacts? And it's created a crisis where there is no good answer out there. And it's something that I'm staring down as I get ready to create an archaeology master plan for the city of Mississauga. And in talking with all the Indigenous communities, that is one of the first questions they ask me. What's going to happen to the artifacts? And I can tell you honestly, when I figure that out, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to get a lot of prestige because I will have cracked a huge issue in settler colonial relationships. And this is not just for municipalities. This is not just for the province. This is for the academy as well, because everybody that's been doing research and excavating sites probably is staring down this same issue. I know that, you know, U of T, Western, all the universities across the province, Trent, all have these massive collections and they don't know what to do with them. It's not that we don't want to return them to the Indigenous peoples. Absolutely we do. It's their history. I'm required to be a steward of their history because of the provincial legislations that exist. But I don't get a choice. I don't get a chance to make that decision and say, no, these artifacts need to go back to this group.
Thank you so much, John, for highlighting all the issues there definitely need to be considered. So our next question is for Amanda. How has your master's focus in Mesoamerican archaeology helped you in your role at Metrolinx and working for the City of Toronto?
You know, I kind of touched on this earlier. I wouldn't say necessarily the region I studied helped me because it didn't. I mean, maybe I have fun stories and I make lots of friends with my stories. But this goes back to what I was saying before in terms of, and it's been brought up about transferable skills in any of the roles, my previous roles. And actually, before I get into this, I'm going to offer if any, I feel like a little bit of the outlier in the sense that I no longer do archaeology. I don't really touch upon anything related to that. I had a quick little blip with cultural museums and culture at the City of Toronto where I was doing some stuff for them with history, but I've moved away from that. So I'm going to offer, if there people have questions, how to transition out of that, still with a love for anthropology and its like applicability to policy and governance and all those things. Please reach out to me through LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat further because it is a little bit of a different path. Because my biggest challenge was taking these skills that I developed in my master's degree and like, oh my God, how do I sell this to people? And I think I did a pretty good job capturing in my LinkedIn, but it is really about taking what I talked about earlier, is that lens. But the things that I took away were, I'm a critical thinker, I'm analytical, I project manage. I didn't touch upon it before, but I actually worked 6 years in the field, supervising students, developing curriculums, writing research grants successfully, and editing, doing copy edit, like, and dealing with the governments, dealing with the Ministry of Culture in Cusco, and dealing with and so all of these skill sets over the 6 years of doing field work are 100% transferable. I use them constantly every day. And so it's not the region I studied, but it was everything I had to do outside of that. And interestingly, my weakest skill set is writing. And I had a meeting with my boss. He told me again, Amanda, it's not my strongest suit, despite my grades, you know, but it was really all those other untangible skills in a way that I just kept building my resume. And when I went and I had about a year of transition, I talked about all of those. I talked about my project management skills. I talked about my community relations. I worked with Indigenous communities in my projects. I talked about my teaching. I talked about my mentorship. I would volunteer. I mentored students to get into graduate schools, usually within vulnerable communities. And so I talked about, those are all the skill sets that I had, not necessarily archaeology, but all the things around working with students and running a project. And that, because that's really what that's really the most valuable thing I took away from that. I hope that helped.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, how no matter like what the skills are, they're definitely transferable. And lastly, Adam, so as you have studied in universities both within Canada and outside of Canada, how would you compare the learning experiences? And what would you recommend to students who want to study in Canada but in a different province, and possibly maybe even pursue anthropology outside of Canada? You're mute, sorry.
Yes, yes. You know, it's a fantastic question. I did move around a lot. I was quite itinerant for quite a few years. Humble beginnings in Winnipeg, then moved here to the big city of Toronto, and I moved to Ottawa for because my wife's work was there. I moved to London to pursue a postdoc at UCL. The nice thing about this, about post-secondary institutions around the world, is that everybody kind of speaks a common language. You know, there's sort of like, if you meet, you can go to a conference, talk to anybody, and you'll have everything in common with them. You'll have more in common with these people than you would with other people in your own local community. So I feel like, yeah, the challenge of moving around to different universities is not really fitting in with the university. It's just the sort of culture shock you might expect with fitting into a wider community. I did research. I mean, I've excavated in Greece for a field school, but we were sheltered in, you know, and we were like with each other. But like I spent actually more than a year living in Jerusalem, a very religious city. I am entirely secular. So, you know, it was really challenging to fit in with, you know, those new surroundings. I moved in Jordan, you know, I excavated for many years in Jordan, every summer, spending a couple of months there each time. My Arabic was never good enough to fit in. Now, when I went to London for a postdoc, you know, of course, I have a facility with the English language. They wouldn't say so. My accent is off, but you know, London was fine. You know, it's just not an issue. But yeah, essentially, because you know, universities all judge students by roughly the same standards. You know, publishing is publishing no matter where you go. Exams, whatever, you know, you go to one library, you've been to all of them. It's right. I feel it's just kind of like making inroads in local communities wherever you go is the biggest challenge. And I guess it comes back to like, yeah, going outside of your comfort zone, making friends with people who are not students or not professors at the university. And trying to like acculturate, which shouldn't be, you know, as an anthropologist, you should have like a head start on that. Empathizing with people who you're meeting and trying to fit in, not voicing your own beliefs on everyone. So just, you know, things like that. Yeah, I hope that answers the question sufficiently.
Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your experiences. Now I will move it on to Shahani, who will narrate the Q&A section of our.
Hi, my name is Shahani, and we are moving on to the Q&A. I just want to say that everyone is giving such great information to the point where I'm questioning my own career path. But I just have a couple questions to ask for you guys, and they're completely general, and you can just raise your hand or just turn on your mics whenever you want. So our first question is, what are some challenges that you have faced when you made your transitions from academics to careers? And what would you suggest students should look out for? I know a couple of you have already answered that, but just repeat maybe or go specifically so that students understand anything. Yes, Crystal?
So for me, it was transitioning from academic writing to writing that's technical writing that's appropriate for your industry. In academia, what tends to be encouraged is long, flowery, you know, just lots of detail and long sentences, and not cutting to the chase when you're in a technical writing role makes people stop reading. So my advice around that would be, you know, educate yourself or find those people who can help you to write the way people do outside of academia, in industry, and it will help you so much. And it's immediately apparent to me when I'm working with students, as I mentioned in our summer experience program, you know, that is a struggle for everyone. You know, it's a skill to be learned to write well, in terms of your technical writing or your report writing skills, and it's very different than writing a paper for a course you're taking.
Shahani, can I just add to that quickly? I was just going to say that I really like what Crystal said, and that's like in my classes, I support 1 page, clear and concise, 1 page, no more. That's what you need to stick to, because it's a valuable skill, and they're different ways of doing. And I would also add, reach out to people who are working professionally, send them your resume. Like I did this with Amanda. I sent my CV. And she's like,
that's why I'm laughing.
She's like, yeah, this is a great CV, but I wouldn't hire you. Like, this is a CV. What am I supposed to do with this? It's a different element. So you have transferable skills, but you have to learn how to put it in the language to get those jobs outside of academia.
Mm-hmm. And resume and CV writing or cover letter writing is also a skill, and your CV for academic jobs and or applying for programs is very different than what you would submit to, well, in my experience, to government or to industry, like working for you know, a cultural resource management firm that handle archaeological projects for land developers. Not the same at all, and you're not going to get very far if you don't understand the difference. They'll literally, you know, flip through your 10 pages and, you know, check it out the door and go for the one that can do it in a page or two, because that's what's valued, that ability to write concisely and clearly.
And just to add to that, my own perspective is that you really have to know your audience ahead of time before you craft your communication. And there are some audiences that will only tolerate a headline, and others that prefer a visual communication. And you know, you really have to do your research, find out who you're talking to before, with whatever you're doing, whether it's a resume or a presentation, you know. And you should, I mean, I would say personally, I've never wanted to unlearn what I learned in graduate school, but I've had to learn an entirely different set of words that essentially convert my complex thoughts into the simplest possible terms. And that's a skill unto itself. I'm still working on it.
It's not easy. It's really not.
I'd say, I don't know if it's still a program. I think it probably still is, the 3-minute thesis competition that happens. I would encourage everybody to do that, because, so just as an awareness, you know, municipal government, there's a limited pot of money to be had for projects, especially capital projects, especially when anybody that's taken the bus or had to drive around Mississauga knows that roads always need repairs, and we always need more buses on the roads. And that's what, you know, a lot of the residents want. So if you want to make a pitch for something, you have, you know, it's that elevator pitch. Learn to be brief, learn to be concise, learn to be very direct. And you know, that goes with everything. When you're talking to your boss in the real world, don't necessarily come to them with an open-ended, hey, here's the situation, what should I do? Come to them with a solution and ask their opinion on that solution. You know, if you're going to a superior with a problem and don't have a solution in hand, you know, immediately it's like, well, then why, like, what's your role in the organization? If you can't, you know, your job is to figure out the solution to this, and it's my job to okay it as a supervisor, as a superior. So always make sure that you understand, your role and understand that when you're bringing something, it's like a final discussion topic to your current, to your professor. Don't leave it open-ended. I think I always got poor marks on like a conclusion because I'd write I'd write that 5-10 page essay at the end of term, and the conclusion is 2 lines at the very end that's like, in summary, this. No, in summary, you need to go back through all your arguments in a very concise manner and make sure that you're hitting all those points, because that's the very last thing somebody's going to read when they're reading through something, and you got to make sure you hit that. Again, can't stress communication enough. Somebody that communicates clearly is you're going to be miles ahead of your competition in the workforce.
I have a good story about this from when I first joined government. So I came in, with my PhD, and I came into a role that was like an entry-level role as an archaeology review officer. So reviewing technical reports, providing advice, and I would get emails from licensed archaeologists asking me to comment on strategy. And I had drafted one piece of advice, and this was a few weeks into having started. And my team lead, so the person who I reported to on technical matters, took a look at my response and said, here you've used an if-then statement, and there you've used the word ergo. And perhaps this isn't the way you want to communicate with this particular stakeholder. And I pushed back on him and I said, I know this archaeologist. He has a PhD. I know he knows what I'm talking about. But I also did internalize that bit of advice. You do have to tailor your communication to the person you're speaking to. And so, Adam, I agree. That's a great point. And from that point on, I tried harder to simplify the way I was presenting, things like email communications, to try to think about the audience. So that was a learning moment for me, for sure.
I think another big transition that is really challenging when you leave the academic life and go into more of a career is failure. If you followed the education system from kindergarten all the way through to high school and then right into a BA, your whole perspective is accomplishment and success. And that's a real defining role. When you get into the real world, you will fail, and you will fail hard sometimes. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be very difficult to pick yourself up and move on, especially since, the entire system that everyone has been in until now has been one of support to ensure that you don't fail. When you're out there working, you can, even though you're part of a corporation or an organization, you can be on your own very much and doing something. And to put in dozens or hundreds of hours preparing a project only to see it just completely and utterly killed by your boss is heart-wrenching. And it, it can be just as brutal as rejection and so forth. And I know we've touched on this before, but embrace that, learn from that, because that's going to make you stronger. And and
big every day.
Every day, the amount of times
I check my fail. I failed 10 times. It means you're productive. You're failing, you're productive, you're moving forward.
Part of my job is protecting all the wonderful old buildings in a city, right? So when we fail at that, when a developer is able to take down a building and replace it with subdivisions, I sit down with my team and we look at everything. It is, but it's like, how, so this was a failure on our part. What are we going to learn from this failure? This is the learning opportunity. Take that time to sit down and look through your failure and figure out what happened. Because when you that learn from your mistakes, and that's what's going to make you better the next time. And you're only as good as your last failure. So learn from that and embrace it. It's okay to fail. I know people feel that oh God, I failed a course, man, when I was doing my undergrad, it was a requirement to do statistics to get an archaeology degree, and that was sweating. And I'm pretty sure the bell curve saved me and 30% of the class on stats because it just was not my strength. And that's okay. But you know what? I love stats. And when I had to apply it to my master's thesis years later, I was able to do it. And this goes into the other thing, that when you're up against something, go and ask for help. It is totally okay to ask for help. You know, it's totally okay. When I had to do stats into my master's thesis and didn't understand what I was doing, I was lucky enough to have a coworker who is now the leading statistician in York Region, who was working for the Ontario government at the time. And, you know, he took the time to go through it. And, you know, that's what took it from a workable thesis to something that was pretty all right. And that's all I have to say about my master's thesis. But no, fail, accept your failure, learn to fail, and ask for help, because it's totally okay to do both those things.
That's a hard lesson to learn, and I don't think you learn that in academia, because most people who continue with like master's and PhD work are incredibly driven, very intelligent, and used to doing very well at things. And that does not create a terribly functional community to be in. And I know personally for me, I didn't learn to fail. And I also was afraid to ask for help because I felt like it would make me look stupid. And so that was a hard lesson to learn. And it's one that, you know, as John said, you learn over time in your job, where you submit something that you think is kind of all right, but, or maybe great, to your manager or whomever, stakeholder, and they, you know, hand you your hat and show you the door. So you need to get used to that. And I'd say to those of you who are mentoring students, Stephen and, you know, Madeline, I hope that you would encourage your students to reach out and to express to you when they're struggling with things, and make it an open conversation, because you know, that wasn't my experience at U of T. So I hope things have changed a bit that way.
Yeah, Crystal, I often emphasize mental health around midterms, exams, projects. I take it really personally. So because I completely agree. I think I did my undergrad and I did not have services or support groups. You kind of have to make it your own, and I don't think we can do that. And yeah, we're in roles of mentorship, but that we can fill. And it's actually, as Maddie was saying about service, part of my service work is being a mentor for undergraduate students and the I don't know, career guidance representative. So if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I can help, and I can connect you to people. If I don't know the answers, I can connect you to people who may be able to help you.
All right.
Sounds like you're on the right track. I'm glad to hear it. I think there's more awareness about these kind of issues now. And, you know, help isn't just the mental help. It can be in any other area of your life, but also just struggling with concepts too. Not being afraid to say, you know, I don't really understand this, and to reach out, that there is no shame in that. And in fact, that is how you learn.
Thank you so much for having this great discussion. I love how you guys were going back and forth with this. Unfortunately, we are coming to an end of discussion, so I'm just going to pass it on to Lydia to just give a closing statement.
Yeah, for sure. This was really great and very valuable. I'd just like to say on behalf of the UTM Anthropology Society, thank you to all of our panelists who were able to take part in today's career panel. I think it was very valuable to myself, and I'm sure all of the other students here today with us. And I'd also like to thank everyone who attended, and Stephen for helping us to organize this event. And we hope to see everyone at our future events. And I'm going to end it there.
Lydia, can you just maybe send out an email to UMass about I guess myself, and I think Maddie has the same kind of service, about just that our contact information is available for students if they have questions? Because I don't think students are really aware of this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I just put our society's email in the chat if everyone wants to write it down. I can also I have everyone's emails. I can contact everyone afterwards if they are looking for more contact information. But
yeah, please do feel free. I'm happy to speak with students if they're interested. You know, I found that very helpful, having people to talk to. So, you know, if anyone would like to reach out, I'm very open to that. And, you know, I've done it in the past for U of T students, so happy to help.
Yeah, okay, perfect. After this meeting, if anyone also wants this recording, we will be posting it on our society's website. I can also, just after the meeting, I'll send out an email to everyone with everyone's contact information. That way, if anyone wants to reach out, they can do that in their own time. But for now, I think I'm going to end it. Thanks so much again to everyone who came out.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Cheers.